The coronavirus has made its way into veterans' homes all across Alabama, but there's one in Huntsville that still has no cases. And today, the National Guard actually surveyed the home to help with decontamination. Our Kelly Kennedy has the story.
Nursing home could be devastating. Tut Fann Veterans Home in Huntsville is taking precautions to make sure that doesn't happen.
It is a high-risk situation. Plus, you have a high-density population in those facilities. If you get one person who is able of communicating that viral disease, it's a problem in an environment like that.
Residents in state veterans homes who test positive are isolated, and employees who show symptoms are not allowed inside the facilities. A recent outbreak at a veterans home in Alexander City led to 25 residents and 18 staff members contracting the virus. At least 2 of those residents have died. The Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs says they're taking steps to prevent that from happening in Huntsville.
As the crisis elevated, we instituted even more precautionary measures, going first with full masks. At one of our homes, we're in full personal protective equipment, as we've had positive test results come back at that state veterans home.
The ADVA recently saw a spike in coronavirus cases. They say that's because more test results are coming back.
Yesterday, we made a formal request through FEMA, the state EMA, and with assistance from the federal VA to do even more rigorous testing. We're pushing for 100% testing in our state veterans homes to get a baseline.
Because of potential shortages, Tut Fann is hiring nurse aides.
I'm just going to be blunt. In some cases, we've had to quarantine staff members if they test positive. That creates a shortage. So to fill those shortages, absolutely HMR has reached out for some temporary medical assistance.
They say they're continuing to seek out new ways to combat this virus. Putting the Valley first, Kelly Kennedy, WZDX News.